My name's Carter. I live in Winter Park, Colorado, a small, quiet town tucked into the mountains where the snow never fully melts and the silence is either peaceful or suffocating, depending on the day. I used to think it was the perfect place to build a life. A steady life. A loyal one. The kind of life you build with someone when you both believe in forever. Brooklyn, my wife, used to believe in that too. Or so I thought. She and I met in Denver 6 years ago, both of us fresh out of grad school, full of caffeine and ambition. She was studying clinical psychology, I was interning with a nonprofit, and we both thought that shared values meant shared destiny. We got married fast. Not out of recklessness, but out of certainty. We were that couple, the one people pointed at and said, now that's solid. And for a while we were. Brooklyn had this energy about her, like she belonged everywhere she went and still made you feel like you were exactly where you were supposed to be. She could read a room in seconds. She always knew when I needed to be left alone and when I needed someone to force a mug of tea into my hands and remind me I wasn't the only one carrying weight. She had her flaws, we both did, but she was real. Grounded. Loyal. Or at least, I convinced myself she was. Last month, she flew out to Seattle for a 3-day leadership conference for mental health professionals. She was excited, talked about the keynote speakers, showed me the schedule, even mentioned grabbing dinner with her old mentor from college who had recently moved to Tacoma. She packed the night before, tossing clothes into her suitcase while we watched a rerun of The Office. I remember she made some joke about me surviving on frozen pizza while she was gone, and I responded with something cheesy like, guess I'll just miss you the old-fashioned way. She laughed, kissed me on the forehead, called me sappy. The next morning, I drove her to the airport. She texted me when she landed. Called that night, too. Everything felt normal. Until the third day. That's when she stopped responding. No call. No text. Just silence. I gave her a few hours. Maybe the sessions ran long. Maybe she was catching up with her mentor. But by evening I couldn't ignore the pit forming in my stomach. I sent a check-in message around 7 p.m. Simple, everything okay? Nothing. At 10:17 p.m. I got one line back. Sorry babe, today's been nonstop. Overwhelmed. I'll call when I can. I love you. But it felt formal. Like she typed it in a rush, just enough to keep the alarm bells at bay. Brooklyn was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. She once left a dinner party early just to call me when I had a bad migraine. She would FaceTime me from conference hotels just to show me the weird art in the lobby. But this time? Not even a voice note. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling until the darkness turned blue and the birds outside started their usual 4 a.m. racket. My mind spiraled. I pictured her falling asleep in bed, tired but content, and I wondered who she was laying next to. I hated myself for thinking it. But once the thought enters your mind, it's hard to evict. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw on jeans, booked a one-way ticket to Seattle, and called off work. I told myself it was nothing, that I just wanted to surprise her, bring her flowers, take her out for breakfast, maybe catch the tail end of the conference and cheer her on like the proud husband I always tried to be. I even stopped at a florist near the airport and bought her favorite tulips, orange and yellow, like little flames, like the ones she used to press between pages of her old psychology textbooks. The flight was short but felt like forever. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, even when the stranger next to me made small talk about the Rockies. I kept looking at her last text. Overwhelmed. What was she overwhelmed with? Work? Guilt? When I landed, I took a cab straight to the Hyatt downtown. She had sent me the reservation info the day she left. I still had the email. I kept telling myself I was overreacting. That I was going to walk in there, see her reading over notes in the cafe, and feel like an idiot. I even practiced my surprised husband voice in the elevator mirror on the way down to the lobby. Well, hey, stranger. You miss me or what? But I never got the chance to say it. Because as I stepped into the lobby, flowers in one hand, my heart pounding like a war drum in my chest, I saw her. She was walking out of the elevator, head tilted towards someone next to her, smiling. Not a polite smile. Not a public smile. A private one. The kind of smile that says I'm safe here. I'm wanted. She wore a navy athletic jacket I didn't recognize. Brooklyn hated anything too sporty. Her hair was tied up, loose strands framing her face. And next to her, carrying her suitcase, was a man I'd never seen before. Tall. Confident. Wearing jeans and a quarter zip. He looked like someone you'd see on a hiking blog, holding coffee and talking about minimalism. He wasn't touching her. Not yet. But the way he looked at her, like she was already his, that was enough. They stepped forward together. She said something that made him laugh. Then, as they reached the revolving door, he leaned in and kissed her cheek. Just a cheek. But my world shattered anyway. Because I knew that kiss. I'd given that kiss. Dozens of times without even thinking about it. On our anniversary. On her birthday. When she was running late for work. It wasn't romantic. It was an asterisk, mate. And the way she accepted it like it was nothing, like it was everything, told me more than any text or voicemail ever could. I froze. I didn't yell. Didn't throw the tulips. Didn't even flinch. I just stood there behind a massive potted plant in the lobby watching my wife walk out the door with another man like I didn't exist. Like I'd never existed. And in that moment I realized something. I wasn't heartbroken. Not yet. I was still in the part of grief where you tell yourself you misunderstood. That maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was all a big, stupid, cruel coincidence. But even as I told myself those lies, I knew. The first cracks had formed. And I couldn't unsee them. I didn't confront her. I didn't chase her through the hotel lobby or storm across the street like a scene in a bad movie. I didn't call out her name or demand to know who he was. I just stood there, tulips hanging limp in my hand, and watched as the two of them walked out into the Seattle drizzle, her suitcase trailing behind them like it belonged to both of them. They didn't even look back. I ducked into the cafe across the street, some tiny place that smelled like cardamom and burnt espresso. I sat by the window, eyes locked on the entrance of the hotel, half hoping she'd come back in alone, that this was all some cruel misunderstanding. But the minutes ticked by. Then an hour. Still nothing. The tulips sat on the table next to my coffee, slowly wilting, petals curling in on themselves like they didn't want to be seen anymore. Neither did I. That's when the mental replay started. You know, the one where your brain suddenly cues up every weird moment from the last 6 months and gives it new context. The quick showers she took the second she got home. I used to think it was just her way of winding down, washing off the stress. But now I wondered, was she washing off someone else? Or the new perfume she started wearing? Stronger, muskier? She said she got it as a free sample from Sephora and just liked the change. I shrugged and told her it suited her. Now it just smelled like someone else's approval. Then there were the names on her phone. At first it was just a few unfamiliar ones. Kira from work, Ben with the training team. People I didn't recognize, but I didn't press it. Brooklyn had always had a wide social circle, colleagues, mentors, peers. But then I remembered one night in January. She'd left her phone on the coffee table while she went to take a bath. It lit up with a message, "Can't stop thinking about earlier. You're incredible." It came from a number with no name saved. I stared at it for too long. By the time she came back into the room, I had already set the phone back down and pretended I hadn't seen it. When she asked why I looked off, I said I was just tired. She kissed my forehead. The next day, the number was gone from her call log. I told myself I was being paranoid. That after a few years of marriage, you start imagining shadows in normal places. But there's a difference between paranoia and intuition. One whispers lies. The other screams truth you're not ready to hear. I flew home the next morning without saying a word. No confrontation. No drama. I just got on a 7:40 a.m. flight back to Denver, tulips still crammed in my carry-on like a symbol of my own denial. She never knew I was there. When she finally texted me that afternoon, just checked out, heading to the airport. Can't wait to be home. Missed you. I stared at the screen for 5 full minutes before locking it and setting it face down on the table. She didn't miss me. She missed the safety of what I gave her. The comfort. The cover story. When she walked through the door that night, she was glowing. Not in a guilty way, in a way that scared me more. Like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just spent her last day of the conference with another man. She hugged me tightly, buried her face into my neck like she always did, and whispered, "I'm so glad to be home." And I hugged her back, heart thudding like a war drum, wondering what kind of man does that make me? The kind who knows and says nothing? For the next week, I observed. She mentioned the conference only in vague terms, great panels, good networking, a bit exhausting. I asked who she hung out with. She rattled off a few women's names from previous years, none of which I could verify. When I asked about anything interesting that happened, she gave me the standard line, "You know, the usual. I'll spare you the therapist shop talk." But it was in the little things where the shift became undeniable. She wouldn't let her phone out of her sight. She started sleeping with it under her pillow, something she'd never done before. When I asked her to toss it over so I could play a song while we cooked dinner, she hesitated for just a second too long. Just a second. But when you're living on high alert, every second counts. One night, she said she was going to start jogging in the mornings. A new routine. Self-care, she called it. Except the running shoes she pulled out of the closet still had the tags on them. And a week later, they were still spotless. She wasn't jogging. She was lying. And once I accepted that, the walls began to close in. I stopped asking questions because I already knew the answers. I watched the way she looked at her phone more than she looked at me. The way she drifted off during dinner. The new playlist she listened to while doing dishes. All soft, moody indie love songs she never liked before. I wasn't just watching a marriage fade. I was watching it be replaced. And yet I said nothing. Why? Because saying something would make it real. Because as long as I kept quiet, I could still pretend we were fixable. That maybe I'd imagine the elevator. The kiss. The suitcase. That maybe she just made a mistake. But deep down, I knew better. The thing no one tells you about betrayal is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in. Quiet. Strategic. Polite, even. It holds the door open for your doubt and offers you coffee while it rearranges your life. And by the time you realize it's moved in, you've already made a place for it at the table. By the time a week had passed, the silence between us had shape thick enough to walk around, thin enough to still pretend it wasn't there. Brooklyn acted like everything was fine. She kissed me goodbye in the morning, sent texts throughout the day, thinking of you, what should we do for dinner? But they felt more like a performance. Like she was trying to fill in the blanks so I wouldn't notice the whole picture was already falling apart. But I noticed. I noticed everything. It wasn't one thing that broke me, it was death by 1,000 details. The shift in her voice. The way she smiled like someone watching themselves smile in a mirror. The way she stopped reaching for me in her sleep even though she used to do that without thinking. Then there was the suitcase. She'd never unpacked it. Not fully. It had been sitting in our hallway closet for a week, half buried under scarves, a pair of snow boots, and that denim jacket she hadn't worn since last spring. I knew it was the same bag she took to Seattle because I helped her zip it up the morning she left. I even tucked one of those tiny fabric dryer sheets inside, like I always did, just to make her clothes smell like home. And yet it just sat there. Like she didn't want to open it. Like she didn't want to remember what was inside. That night, she was on a late video call with her supervisor. She told me it was a career mapping session, something about long-term goals and mentorship. I nodded, smiled, said, "Go get em." Then I poured myself a glass of whiskey and waited for her to close the office door behind her. I stood in front of that closet for a long time. Not because I was scared of what I might find, but because some part of me already knew. I'd seen enough to feel the truth, but I needed to hold it. I needed the kind of proof you couldn't excuse away with words like misunderstanding or coincidence. When I opened the suitcase, the first thing I noticed was how carefully everything was packed. Too carefully. Like someone had taken their time to curate the mess. Nothing looked worn. Nothing looked used. A pair of high-heeled ankle boots I'd never seen before sat at the bottom, soles barely scuffed. A Berg *NY lace camisole folded like it had never been touched. No hotel receipts. No conference pamphlets. Not even a lanyard. But then I checked the side pocket. And that's when I found it. A small velvet box, the kind reserved for something expensive or personal. The kind of box you only open when you're sure of the person on the other end. Inside was a key. Not a house key. Not a spare car key. But a sleek, brushed metal key with an engraved fob that had a Seattle address etched into it. And next to it, tucked neatly behind the satin lining, was a folded white envelope. No name on the front. Just the faint outline of where it had been sealed and unsealed, like it had been read and reread. The card inside was thick, almost like cardstock. Handwritten in looping, deliberate script. For the woman who knows how to be wanted, a home where you'll always be welcome. No signature. Just that sentence. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers curled around the edge of the paper like it might vanish if I blinked. My heart didn't drop. It didn't twist. It didn't even race. It just stopped. That was the moment everything broke. Not because I didn't already know I did, but because now I had evidence that someone else knew her too. Knew the her that smiled for another man, packed a new jacket she'd never worn around me, accepted keys to a place she didn't invite me to. She wasn't just slipping away. She'd already left. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. But I did start pulling everything out of that closet like it was infested. Her scarves, her coats, the heels she only wore on girls' nights that probably weren't girls' nights. I ripped through drawers, dug under the bed, pulled hangers down two at a time like I was exorcising the house of ghosts I hadn't invited in. By the time I stopped, the hallway looked like a department store clearance rack exploded. Her stuff everywhere, piles of fabric and leather and curated little lies. I stuffed it all into suitcases. Every item. No note, no explanation. Just her life in boxes lined up by the door like a checkpoint she never thought she'd reach. The next morning, I woke up early. She was still asleep. I made coffee, stood in the living room, and stared at those bags like they might blink first. Then I took a photo. A quiet one. No filter, no zoom. Just the luggage, the entryway, the edge of the doorframe. I texted her 3 words and attached the image. Don't come back. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. No response. No, what is this? Or let's talk. Nothing. It was quiet in the way only the truth can be. And in that silence I finally exhaled. At first, there was silence. No furious knocking at the door. No dramatic calls. No sudden flurry of texts demanding to know what I'd done. Just hours of nothing. Like she was waiting to see if I'd blink first. Like this was just another one of our fights that she could manage with a well-timed apology and a softened tone. But I had changed the locks. And something in me had shifted, not in anger, not in spite, but in clarity. I'd spent too long giving her the benefit of the doubt. Now she could sit with hers. That evening, the performance began. It started with short messages. One-liners. Emotionally vague but surgically placed. I don't understand. Carter, please. Can we talk? I said nothing. Then came the voice notes. Her voice soft, almost childlike, wrapped in a quiver that had once disarmed me. You misunderstood what you saw, she said. It wasn't what it looked like. She sniffled mid-recording like she'd been crying for hours. I knew that sound. I'd comforted her through it before. But now it felt practiced. Hello. I watched them come in without opening a single one. By the next morning, she escalated to full-on video messages. Teary eyes. Messy hair. Sitting in her car. Parked somewhere, probably down the block. Carter, you're shutting me out. I don't even know what to say. I never meant to hurt you. I never stopped loving you. Please, just let me explain. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. I was confused. Confused. That word again. The one people use when they want to be absolved without being accountable. It's not a lie. It's not the truth. It's the fog they hide in so they don't have to look you in the eye. I didn't respond. The messages kept coming. Less sorrowful, more defensive. You were always cold. I felt like I was walking on eggshells with you. You never wanted to talk about the things that mattered. Blame. Classic pivot. When guilt fails, you redirect. She wanted me to question myself. Maybe she wasn't the villain. Maybe I had been inattentive, emotionally unavailable, too focused on work. Maybe this was partially on me. But then I remembered the key. I remembered the envelope. The note that told her she was the woman who knows how to be wanted. That wasn't confusion. That was intent. She hadn't tripped into another man's apartment. She'd been gifted access. She had walked through that door. Probably many times. Probably with wine in her bag and a story in her pocket to explain away the hours. A week passed. I still hadn't answered anything. I stayed at my sister's house, letting the silence do the talking for me. She lived just outside town, close enough that I could still go to work and far enough that Brooklyn wouldn't come storming over unannounced. But she didn't come. Not until the letter. It arrived in the mail. A real letter. Not from her, from him. Jason. The man from the hotel lobby. The one who kissed her on the cheek and held her suitcase like it belonged to both of them. He wrote, I didn't know she was married. I swear. She told me you'd been separated for a while. That it was complicated. That you two were just living together until it was final. He said he found my name on a utility bill when he helped her pack a box of books from our office. He Googled me. Found my LinkedIn. Realized we were still connected. That we were still married. I'm not trying to cause trouble, he wrote. I just wanted you to know I didn't go into this thinking I was stealing someone's wife. She told me she was leaving you. That it was already done. He signed his name at the bottom in small, neat handwriting. Jason R. No last name. Just an initial. I don't know what I expected. Maybe arrogance, maybe defensiveness, but what I read was worse. Sincerity. Jason wasn't some predator. He'd been lied to, too. That night, I asked him to meet me. Not to fight. Just to hear him out. We met at a quiet bar just off the main street in Fraser. No one we knew would be there. I wore a flannel and jeans. He showed up in the same kind of jacket I'd seen him in that day at the Hyatt. He looked nervous. I told him to relax. I wasn't there for a scene. I just wanted to understand the timeline. He didn't know much. Just that they'd met at a training retreat 3 months ago. She told him we were separated. That I didn't want a divorce, but she was emotionally already out. She said you wouldn't take it well, he told me. That if you found out early, you'd throw her out before she could line things up for herself. Line things up. That's what I kept replaying. She said, he went on. If he finds out before I'm ready, I'll have nothing. I need it to be smooth. I need a guarantee I won't be left with empty hands. Empty hands. So that's what I'd become in her story. A roadblock. A financial inconvenience. A man to tiptoe around, not for love, not for dignity, but for logistical reasons. Jason said he gave her the apartment not because he pitied her, but because he believed in the version of her that she showed him: vulnerable, trapped, resilient. He didn't realize he was just another character in her story. She told me you were angry, he said. But now, I get it. I paid for both our drinks. As I stood to leave, he said, I'm sorry, man. For real. I nodded. Then I walked out without looking back. Because I realized something. It wasn't just me she deceived. She lied to everyone. She showed up 3 days later. No call. No warning. Just appeared at my sister's doorstep like a ghost, still wearing the clothes it died in. I had just come back from a run. Earbuds in, mind blank, lungs burning in the best possible way. The air smelled like pine and snowmelt. Peace for once felt real. Then I saw her car parked out front. She was sitting on the porch steps, hands knotted in her lap, red tulips beside her. The irony wasn't lost on me. Hers were fresh. Mine had died a long time ago. I walked up slowly, calmly. She looked up, eyes swollen, mascara smudged. The whole heartbreak costume. If I didn't know better, I might have believed it. Carter, she whispered, standing. Please, just 5 minutes. I didn't speak. I just opened the screen door, stepped inside, and came back out with a plain manila folder in one hand. She flinched when she saw it. Inside were 4 items. The printed text she thought she'd deleted, the receipt for the jewelry box I'd found in her bag, the photo of the apartment key, and the card that said it all. I laid them out one by one, like evidence in a trial she never expected to attend. She didn't try to explain, didn't cry. She just sat on the porch, silent, her body folding in on itself like paper in the rain. You weren't afraid of losing me, I said, my voice steady. You were afraid of being exposed. She didn't argue, didn't deny it, just pressed her fingers to her lips like she could push the truth back inside her mouth and pretend it had never gotten out. I thought if I could just explain. There's nothing left to explain. I didn't want it to end like this. I looked out toward the tree line, the horizon smudged in orange from the setting sun. Yeah, well, we don't always get to pick our endings. She reached for me then. Not with her hands, but with her voice. That soft, careful tone she'd used when we first started dating. The one that used to break me. We can fix this, she said. It almost sounded believable. But standing there, on a porch that wasn't ours, in front of a woman I didn't recognize anymore, I realized something that hit me harder than all the betrayal put together. I didn't want to. I didn't want to fix something that had been silently rotting while I convinced myself it was growing. So I shook my head. Just once. And that was it. The divorce was swift. No fights. No screaming in parking lots. No middle-of-the-night regrets. She didn't contest a thing. Maybe she was too tired. Maybe she was relieved. Maybe she knew she'd already lost. I stayed in Winter Park. Found a small rental cabin near the river. Nothing fancy, a worn leather couch, a porch with wind chimes, a bed that creaked when I turned over. But it was mine. At night, I started writing things down. Not as a journal, more like evidence. Proof that I was still here. That I hadn't disappeared just because she had chosen to. Sometimes I wrote one sentence. Sometimes pages. The last line I ever wrote, the one I left on the final page before I closed the notebook for good, was this. If someone fears being alone, that's not love. That's fear. And I'm not afraid anymore. I didn't choose to walk away out of anger. I chose to walk away because she'd already shown me the door. And I finally realized I didn't need her to hold it open.